2025 fantasy football drafts are right around the corner. This is not a drill. Heading into those drafts, you're going to want a list of rankings to stick by to know where you're going at every single pick. What can be even more helpful is a set of tiered rankings, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. Tiered rankings still ranks every player, but also groups them in terms of relative value. All the players in Tier 1 are of similar value, same with Tier 2, Tier 3, and so on. And it gives you an even more in-depth game plan in case something goes wrong with your draft strategy on the day. Let's go ahead and get into my ranking of the top 60 players in fantasy football this year with a tiered ranking. First up, we got Tier 1. I'm calling it the best of the best. These are 6 players that I consider the best assets in all of fantasy football. There's a reason I'm gunning for a top 6 pick in every single one of my drafts, and that's to get one of these guys to have the foundation for an elite fantasy team. Obviously, every single player in the first round has the ceiling to finish as the number 1 overall player, but I think these top 6 have an even greater chance of doing that. First up, we have Jamar Chase, wide receiver for the Bengals. Led the NFL in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, winning that triple crown back in 2024. He's the best wide receiver in the NFL right now, but right along with him is Justin Jefferson, his college teammate out of LSU, who was on the Minnesota Vikings. Jefferson and Chase are basically the wide receiver 1A and 1B of the entire NFL. It's hard to really put one above the other. They're both just so elite in terms of talent and production. So obviously in 12-team PPR leagues, which is what I'm basing these rankings around, they're going to be my number 1 and number 2. Next up, we have my RB1 overall, Bijan Robinson, running back for the Atlanta Falcons. Before you guys get worried, I'm not going to go through a detailed explanation of every player and their fantasy value, but at least the top 6 I'm going to go a bit more in depth. Robinson exploded in 2024, going from 214 carries in his rookie year to 304 in 2024. That is a massive increase in rushing volume, and in the stats it showed he put up over 1,400 rushing yards and 14 rushing touchdowns. That is just an elite season from a fantasy running back. On top of that, with that PPR upside, he also had 61 receptions for 431 receiving yards, just an elite receiving stat line. He's going to give you that extra boost in points every single week as a receiver. He is such a complete running back. He's so shifty. He has that power. He has the speed. And I don't think anything is going to change. In fact, he may get even more carries this year, and he may take them for more rushing yards. I think he's the centerpiece of this offense, along with Drake London, Michael Penix Jr., Kyle Pitts, and Darnell Mooney. His volume is elite both as a rusher and receiver. He's my top running back. Next up at the 4th spot, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, running back for the Detroit Lions. And I may be a little bit biased because Gibbs did win me a fantasy championship last year, but nonetheless, he's fantastic. 250 carries for 1,412 rushing yards. If you're like me and can't do the math in your head, that is 5.6 yards per carry. Just ridiculously efficient running. On top of that, 16 rushing touchdowns. That's 26 rushing touchdowns overall in the first 2 years of his career. This guy knows how to get in the end zone. And unlike with other players where you see a really small amount jump up to a really big amount, you worry about regression. The way they use him, I'm not worried at all. There's no rushing quarterback potentially taking away design runs along the goal line. And Jahmyr Gibbs is obviously a top 5 running back in the NFL. I trust him to get those touchdowns every single game. He also had 63 receptions for 517 receiving yards, one of the best receiving backs in the entire NFL. He is regularly involved in that part of the offense. I don't expect that to change. And sure, yes, you can be worried about David Montgomery, but Jahmyr Gibbs is so talented. I completely trust his fantasy floor and how high his fantasy ceiling is. He's my very close running back to this year. I think he, Bijan Robinson, and Saquon Barkley are all very, very close in terms of how good they can be for fantasy this year. We'll just see how it goes. Next, we have the guy I was just talking about, Saquon Barkley, running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. He was unbelievable last year. After signing with Philadelphia in free agency, he put up over 2,000 rushing yards. If that wasn't enough, 278 receiving yards and 15 total touchdowns is the cherry on top. He led the NFL in carries last year by a wide margin with 345. The reason I don't have him as my overall RB1 is because that level of production isn't exactly sustainable. I don't think he'll have 2,000 yards again. 345 carries is a lot of wear and tear to a running back, but he is in a very unique situation with one of the best offensive lines in the last decade. So Saquon Barkley may not be taking on as much contact as the average running back because they make massive holes for him. Nonetheless, I think he'll be around that 1,500 to 1,600 rushing yard mark, and he'll be absolutely elite again for fantasy in 2025. The final player in this tier, we have CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. Look, it wasn't a fantastic year for Lamb like we were all expecting, like we've all become accustomed to. However, almost 1,200 receiving yards when your starting quarterback goes down early in the season with a season-ending hamstring injury is just unbelievably impressive. And with Dak Prescott returning from his injury this year, and remember, he was a 2023 MVP candidate. He was amazing that year, the last time he played a fully healthy season. CeeDee Lamb is ready to take over fantasy football yet again. CeeDee Lamb has an extremely high floor. Like a guy like Justin Jefferson, he's proved himself to be quarterback independent. Meaning it doesn't matter who's under center, he's going to put up fantasy relevant stats. Expect him to have another elite year this season. Next up is Tier 2. I'm calling it the certified first rounders. These are the final 6 players I think have to be selected in the first round of 12-team fantasy football leagues. We have Puka Nacua, Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Derrick Henry, Ashton Jeanty, and Devon Achane. Obviously, 3 wide receivers and 3 running backs all have the potential to finish as the top overall player in fantasy this year. Puka Nacua has been ridiculously efficient in terms of per-game stats his entire career. Even in only 11 games last year, he almost put up 1,000 receiving yards. Malik Neighbors, in his rookie season, put up over 1,200 receiving yards with one of the worst quarterback rooms we've ever seen. Now with the quarterback upgrade, I truly believe he has the ceiling to finish as a top 3 receiver. Amon-Ra St. Brown has proven to be one of the safest options in fantasy leagues over the past couple years, regularly finishing as a top 5 receiver. He's going to get 1 million targets. He's scored 22 receiving touchdowns over the past 2 years, and I expect him to have well over 1,200 receiving yards. Also, inside his opponent's 10-yard line last season, he led all NFL receivers in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. And he was also second in the NFL with 15 targets. That red zone usage, especially inside the 10-yard line like I just specified, is just insane. Derrick Henry was the NFL's second leading rusher last season. I think he should be a 99 overall in Madden. That's a conversation for a different day, but almost 2,000 rushing yards last year and nearly a rushing touchdown every single game. He's extremely safe if that age doesn't become a problem. Ashton Jeanty, the rookie for the Raiders, obviously I think he's a very risky pick, but the ceiling is there. He's an elite prospect in basically every single category. Production, contact balance, speed, patience, power, whatever you want to say, he's fantastic. If he gets a ton of volume in that Pete Carroll rushing attack in year 1, he could be elite. Finally, Devon Achane, the highest volume receiving back in the NFL last year. Among his position, he was second in targets, first in receptions as well. Obviously, he plays most of his time as a running back, but he's in the slot a lot as well. That elite receiving floor gives him so much value in fantasy, and he could finish as the overall RB1 if he gets a ton of work there. But it also matters if his quarterback stays healthy. That's something to watch. Next up, we have Tier 3, the top tier assets. There are 12 players in this tier that I think should make up the second round of your fantasy draft. The order of these players is a lot more interchangeable to me than the first round. I think it's a lot more fluid. And throughout this tier, you see a balance of a history of production and strong upside for the future. We have Brian Thomas Jr., Christian McCaffrey, Nico Collins, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Brock Bowers, Drake London, Bucky Irving, A.J. Brown, Ladd McConkey, and finally our 2 quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson and then Josh Allen. I think even with Travis Hunter in the fold, the number 2 overall pick from this year's draft, Brian Thomas Jr. is still the number 1 target in Jacksonville. He led all rookies in receiving yards last year. Christian McCaffrey, that injury history really concerns me. Obviously, he's fantastic when he's on the field, maybe the best player on offense in the entire NFL at times. I think this is a solid spot to get in with a low floor, but also probably the highest ceiling in all of fantasy. Nico Collins, when he's been able to stay on the field, has been extremely effective as a deep threat and just an overall receiver. He's fantastic, and his connection with C.J. Stroud is elite. You have a couple workhorse running backs with Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs. Then we get into Brock Bowers. He's just an elite fantasy tight end. His ability as a receiver is unmatched. He finished as the overall tight end 1 as a rookie last year, and his ability as a route runner, as a contested catch specialist, as just a weapon overall in general is just so elite. Drake London and Bucky Irving are some of the best young weapons in all of football. I think their ceilings are even higher this year, especially Bucky Irving, as he's going to earn more snaps. A.J. Brown and Ladd McConkey are set up for productive years with good quarterbacks at the helm of their offenses. And finally, you have Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. I have Lamar just a spot above Josh. I think he's a slightly better quarterback. But of course, it's 1A and 1B. They're both absolutely elite, and you can't go wrong selecting either. Next up, we have Tier 4, which is the potential ADP, average draft position, if you don't know, outperformers. These are 6 players that I think could really vastly outperform their draft positions. Not that players ranked ahead or behind them can't do the same, but I think the ceilings of the players within this tier are just incredibly high. And the wide receivers in this group in particular, when they're on the field, are just insane. We have Jackson Smith and Jigba, Trey McBride, Tyreek Hill, Jaden Daniels, Devontae Adams, and T. Higgins. Jackson Smith and Jigba is the unquestioned number 1 in his offense in Seattle this year with Sam Darnold at the helm at quarterback. And Trey McBride is probably the second best tight end in the NFL. He is such a great receiving option. He is so strong and so dominant in that area. Tyreek Hill I expect to rebound after kind of a down year with the Dolphins' whole offense in flux. If Tua's healthy, Tyreek's going to be awesome. Jaden Daniels is my quarterback 3 this year. I don't expect him to take a step back. That rushing ability gives him a really nice floor. That's what I look for in any quarterback I draft. And his ability as a precision passer and a downfield thrower are just very, very impressive to me. Devontae Adams is going to thrive in Los Angeles if Matthew Stafford can stay healthy. I think he and Puka Nacua are just probably the best wide receiver duo in the entire NFL, maybe besides Jamar Chase and the next player in our ranking, T. Higgins. If you're not familiar with this stat, allow me to put you on. T. Higgins was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy PPR points per game last year. That is just unreal. When he's on the field, he benefits from one of the most high-powered offenses in the entire NFL. Jamar Chase can help space out the defense, and Joe Burrow is just one of the best quarterbacks we've seen in a while. Burrow promotes the fantasy success of his receivers. T. Higgins is no different. If he can stay healthy, which is a big if, especially over the last couple of years, he's going to be fantastic. Next up, we have tier 5. I'm calling it the stud running back options and Jalen Hurts. It's a tier made up of all running backs and, of course, the Eagles quarterback himself. There are 8 total players in this tier. And I really do think this is the point in fantasy drafts for running backs, especially those middle tier guys are going to be flying off the board. And that's why I'm representing that with having 7 running backs here. There's kind of a mix of the type of player you can select at the position at this range. There's the veteran stalwarts of the position, but also the young up-and-comers chasing their first RB1 finish. If their seasons and the situations around them break the right way, any single one of these running backs can finish top 10 at their position. Kyren Williams, first off, just got that long-term extension, meaning the Rams want him to be that offensive centerpiece long-term. That's a really big step forward for his fantasy value in my eyes. He's so good at getting into the end zone, and his volume has been top tier the last couple seasons. Next up, obviously, we can talk about Jalen Hurts. That rushing touchdown floor with a tush push is just unbelievable. He's also pretty solid as a passer and gets those rushing yards, so his floor is just very, very high, and I think his ceiling, again, with that tush push is extremely high as well. He's a guy I'm targeting in all my drafts. Chase Brown really proved me wrong and emerged last season as the Cincinnati Bengals RB1. They didn't draft anyone major, so it looks like he's going to hold that title this year as well. Behind one of the best offenses in football in Cincinnati, I think he's going to thrive and be a fantastic running back. Kenneth Walker has a very high ceiling, but also a very low floor with those injury concerns. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. He wasn't able to stay healthy at all last year, and behind a really bad Seahawks offensive line, he struggled. However, the Seahawks did make a change or two to that offensive line that hopefully make it at least marginally better. And with Clint Kubiak, our offensive coordinator, whose offense kind of revolves around the rushing attack, I think Kenneth Walker's ceiling is extremely high and worth a selection. He's one of the most talented players in the entire NFL when he's on the field, kind of like T. Higgins, who I just talked about. He is so good at breaking tackles and evading defenders. I think he could be one of the best high-volume rushers in the NFL if he reaches his ceiling. Amarian Hampton was my very close RB2 in this year's draft class, which again was loaded at the position. His best traits are his strength, his contact balance, and even his elusiveness. He's also sneaky good as a receiver, so watch out for that PPR upside, but he's just such a strong runner, and I expect him to finish this year as the RB1 for the Chargers ahead of Najee Harris. He could be a league winner. We also have James Cook running back for the Buffalo Bills. There are a couple things that scare me, and it's not just the touchdown regression, which is also a big factor, but it's also the decrease in volume from 2023 to 2024, both as a rusher and a receiver. Also, all the design runs that go to Josh Allen in this offense will take a bit of volume away from Cook, as well as the emergence of Ray Davis, who was an impressive rookie last year. Also, Cook has been sitting out of practice because of the ongoing contract negotiation. The Bills don't want to pay him as much as he's been asking, but we'll see who caves in first. It's a very interesting situation, but nonetheless, James Cook is a very good running back. James Conner's at 37. Obviously, he was one of those veteran stalwarts I mentioned earlier. He was so good last year, both as a rusher and a receiver. He set a career high in rushing yards and also had 414 receiving yards. I have no idea why he's being drafted as late as he is. And then we have Alvin Kamara at 36, one of the best receiving running backs of our time. He's going to get that PPR value and catch a ton of passes, especially in the Saints offense where there's not a lot of high-quality targets. And while he might not have a great quarterback, he'll get plenty of volume. Next up, we have Tier 6, our largest tier. This is upside with risk. Besides Joe Burrow and George Kittle, I think every single player in this tier has significant risk tied to their fantasy values. I mean, for a guy like Garrett Wilson, how high quality are the targets he's going to be getting from Justin Fields? I get they were college teammates, but Fields hasn't been an especially elite passer in his time in the league so far. And with his teammate Breece Hall, is it going to be a running back by committee situation with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis? Is his volume going to be as inconsistent as it was last year, both as a rusher and a receiver? With Dave Montgomery, how big of a role is he going to have with Jahmyr Gibbs continuing his escalation as one of the best running backs in football? With Rashee Rice, is he going to get that suspension? How long is it going to be if he does? You know, I could go down the list, but all these players, besides the two I mentioned at the beginning, are extremely risky picks. But you don't win fantasy football leagues by going for 5th place. You win by drafting these risky players in the middle rounds with super high ceilings. Once you've laid a strong foundation for your team, you can afford these risks. You know, all these players, again, have these ceilings. You know, Marvin Harrison Jr. is an elite talent. He was an elite prospect last year. If his chemistry with Kyler Murray jumps up, he could be fantastic. fantastic. DK Metcalf might get a million targets from Aaron Rodgers this year and be a really high volume weapon in this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Maybe Caleb Williams takes a step forward this year and DJ Moore is his number one receiver again. For pretty much all the players in this tier, I could list a reason for why I'm very excited about their fantasy value and a reason for which I'm very worried about their fantasy value. Building your team is about balancing these risky and safe players and building an equilibrium of sorts. To do that, you're going to want to take a player or two from this tier for sure. Moving on to our last tier, we have tier 7, the best of the rest. This is a mix of high floor and boom or bust options that could really make or break your fantasy team. Devonta Smith and Courtland Sutton I view as very high floor but low ceiling fantasy options that you kind of know what you're getting. Jalen Waddle, Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, they're more boom or bust guys. You never really know exactly what they're going to do week to week. They kind of worry you sometimes, but they have those huge explosive weeks. Jalen Waddle especially, I think, could kind of balance out and be a safer player this year, but we will have to see. Jameson Williams and George Pickens, I think, are going to emerge as two of the best wide receiver twos in the league this year. I really like where they're at. And while I don't think they're going to be like a top 15 option at their position or anything, they could definitely be top 20. Finally, we have Tedaroa McMillan, wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. He's a rookie this year, very polarizing prospect, but I love his blend of size and athletic ability. I have no doubt he can be the wide receiver one for the Panthers this year if he's given the opportunity, and Bryce Young continues to develop like we saw last year. And then finally, going through some honorable mentions that were just off the list, we have 3 rookie running backs, Travion Henderson, Caleb Johnson, and RJ Harvey. We also have Mike Evans, Kyler Murray, Chris Olave, Evan Ingram, Travis Hunter, and Chris Godwin. Overall, I hope you guys really liked that top 60 rankings and tiers list for fantasy football drafts this year. I hope it helps you out in the coming weeks. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more fantasy advice like this every single week. I'm Joe, and this is Fantasy Trading Room.